They kept pushing the tracks forward, but there was a long, long pause when they reached Chippenham, because there was a major obstacle up ahead. But there was no pause for Brunel. He kept dashing furiously around the countryside in his specially designed black carriage known as the Flying Hearse. It's a pity he didn't stay around here long enough to make the acquaintance of one of the locals, because in August 1835, while Brunel was overseeing the birth of the Great Western Railway, 2 miles down the road, another birthday party was going on.
When we think of our country as an industrial country, which it is, I usually think of the north of England, but it ain't necessarily so. Concords from Bristol, Stoddart and Pitt cranes at Bath, the hovercraft made on the Isle of Wight, the helicopter at Yeovil in Somerset. And it was a Dorset man, Fox Talbot, who crossed the county line and came here to Wiltshire and invented the world's first camera. This is it, the world's first. Hello, Japan. You wouldn't be able to see without us. This upper-class weirdo, Fox Talbot, had the local carpenter make up this camera. Fox Talbot's interests were flora and fauna. He could speak French and German, Greek, Latin and Hebrew, but he got his degree from Trinity College, Cambridge in maths. The first photograph he ever took was of that window, of the big house he'd inherited here at Laycock, just outside Chippenham in Wiltshire. It was August 1835, 150 years ago. Happy birthday, camera.
Oh, there's not much sign of a railway up here. This is Box Hill, and it does lie right across the route of the Great Western. But we're on top of the hill, and you don't put railways over the top of hills. Brunel's plan was for a tunnel 2 miles long, somewhere down there. As usual, there's no shortage of critics to say the whole scheme is impossible. One critic in particular brought the full weight of a massive scientific intellect to bear on the problem, Dr. Dionysius Lardner, who proved that because the tunnel had a 1 in 100 slope, trains would emerge at the terrifying speed of 120 miles an hour, a velocity at which it was well known no human being could breathe. Brunel pointed out there were 1 or 2 small errors in the calculations, and the actual speed would be 54 miles an hour. Collapse, as they say, of stout party. Well, here it is. Well, this is the east end of Box Tunnel. It's pretty impressive, isn't it? You can't deny this really is an absolutely magnificent work. But it's hard for us today to realize just how magnificent it really is. All this was built before the age of machines. This was made by men, some of the toughest men the world's ever seen, the railway navvies, over 4,000 of them. They began tunneling in from each end. Then they dug shafts down to the line of a tunnel. Then, with simple black powder for blasting and picks and shovels, they began hacking their way through the hill. The only light was the light of candles. There was constant danger from falling rocks and floods. At one time, the pumps were overwhelmed and the water rose 50 feet in the shafts. It was dark, filthy, perilous work. Over 100 men died digging that tunnel. Brunel was shown a list of 131 men injured in Bath Hospital. It was, he said, a small list for such an undertaking. The human price was high, but it was a major work. And not surprisingly, the directors wanted to come along and see it. So Brunel took them to the top of the hill, and then he lowered them down the shaft in a bucket. I think it's a wonderful image, these respectable gents in their top hats and frock coats getting into the bucket and dropping down this dark shaft. Oh, I bet the navvies loved it. took nearly 5 years to complete the tunnel through Box Hill. And at last, the trains could steam through under the triumphal arch designed by Brunel himself. Not that every passenger was prepared to risk it. Some remembered the tales of doom told by Dr. Dionysius Lardner and preferred to walk or take a carriage over the top and wait for the next train. The rest thundered on along the lines to the west. The railway wasn't the first new transport route to reach Bath. In 1810, John Rennie saw the opening of his Kennet and Avon Canal, a watery connection between London and Bristol. The canal hasn't fared quite as well as the railway over the years. In fact, the GWR took it over and ran it for a bit. Then it became derelict. It's only now being restored and brought back into use. But the railwaymen had many reasons to say thank you to their predecessors. For a start, they inherited a very competent and efficient body of men, the navvies. In fact, the name navvy is short for navigator, the men who built the canal navigations. And when Brunel was setting out his line, it took a sweeping curve round to the north, the Great Way Round, GWR. But when he came to the Avon Valley, then he found his route running parallel to the old canal. And the two engineers had something else in common. They both respected the old city. John Rennie built in the local Bath stone. And so did Brunel when he came to build his splendid viaduct, taking the railway into the station at Bath.
The railway brought kings and queens and the cream of European society to take the waters at Bath. And a trio played in this pump room then as it does today. Mendelssohn, who had tea with Mrs. Brunel, who must have been highly delighted as Mr. Brunel was hardly ever at home. One thing we haven't mentioned about God's wonderful railway, as snobs christened the GWR, is that it didn't care for oiks. The railway staff had instructions issued from on high that they were to offer no assistance to third-class passengers. Third-class passengers were put in a truck behind the engine, in an open wagon behind the flying cinders. They had to pay for it. Sometimes it was windy, sometimes it was wet, and sometimes it was cold. Some third-class passengers were taken off at Bath dead. They'd frozen to death, stiff as a board, with little burn marks on their bodies where the cinders had caught them. Well, I've been here before, and the glories of that pump room haven't changed in 150 years. But I can remember in the 1960s, there were terrible battles in Bath over motorway proposals and ring road schemes. And there were insensitive public authorities and selfish, speculating capitalists wanted to knock buildings down. And the people rose up and in the nick of time managed to save most of beautiful Bath. Oddly enough, the coming of the Great Western didn't cause the same kind of outcry against trains as happened at Eton. Bath Spa Station is built in the centre of the town and very elegant. And isn't this nice? A little flowery tribute from the Parks Department. Ferns and plants, all in Great Western green, Paddington Bear, his jar of marmalade and duffel coat toggles. It's lovely. Flowery tribute. How fitting. Well done. It's lovely.
This is Bristol and the end of the line. Except it wasn't the end of the line for the first train and the first passengers. The broad gauge empire of Brunel was being extended westward. And the train went on all the way to Bridgewater. And this isn't Brunel's original station. His bit's over there. Now, if Paddington was a cathedral, this is a very superior parish church. It has a nave and aisles and a quite magnificent roof with imitation hammer beams. Now, the trains haven't been coming here for about 20 years, and for a long time it suffered the ignominy of being used as a car park. But now it's being taken over by the Brunel Engineering Centre Trust at a peppercorn rent from British Rail. Well done, BR. It's good to know that the old station's got a future. Well, you might wonder what we're doing standing out here and not going in for a look. Well, there's something going on in there, which I think Mr. Brunel would find very interesting.
The time is the Industrial Revolution. The place is England's green and pleasant land. Victoria is queen, solemn and serene.
And not amused by anyone or anything she sees. With every class and every occupation, we live in the man they most revere. If you like to ask, who takes the daily task, it's the more inventive engineer.
The soldier in the battleground of empire.
The tradesman busy totting up the bill.
The miners underground.
The chambermaid is found, cleaning and scrubbing and rubber and rubbing and making the work around. For every trade the world is a celebration. When after labor readily agree.
Great!
To battle these fancy soldiers rise to these. Is the more inventive engineer. Our houses, they are full of new inventions. We even want a ship
That was a beautiful 150th birthday present from Bristol to Brunel and the Great Western. And people will come from far and wide to see it. You know, every day we've been filming, the trains have been running. We've been lucky. All I've got to do now is hope they're running tomorrow to take me home. It's a wonderful railway. Never be another to make such a mark on the land. And we know who did it. It wasn't a committee. It was the work, the vision and achievement of one man. When I think back down that road in the Thames Valley, there are all those brains at Oxford, Eton, and in Bristol. We shouldn't be having a train strike threatened. We should be going to the moon. We should be taming the 7 bore. We shouldn't be thinking of buying nuclear reactors from America. We, Bristol, built the Concorde to fly faster than the speed of sound. We're capable of doing the grand thing. And in Swindon, there'll be no celebration because they're closing the works down. We weren't allowed to film there. But earlier this year, Peter Brown of BBC Bristol got a look in just before the closure was announced, and these are the works he found.
In the spring of 1985, 2,300 men and women still worked here. And in the week before the announcement of the shutdown, I was trying to find out what the spirit of the Great Western meant to them. My guide was a man who'd spent most of his working life here, Ted Jeffries.
Ted, you seem busy enough in here.
Yes, it's fairly busy in the machine shop.
What do you think the spirit of the Great Western, if it means anything at all, would mean in a place like this?
Well, they're proud of the job that they do. The standards that they'll reach. It's been bred in from father to son all the way down the line, and it's still here.
Would you have some second and third generation railwaymen working
there are
here?
many.
What do you think the spirit of the Great Western means to you?
It's something that's alive here. I'm part of it. You can't really say, yes, it's that. It's something that visitors, when I bring them round, they feel it.
But you're sure it's there?
It's there.
Something in
it's
the air.
there, yeah.
As a boy, all Ted's ambitions centred on working inside.
I mean, was there a special sense of being a part in Swindon?
Oh, yes. For me, anyway, with a railway background but unable to get in at the start, I was all my life looking forward to the day when I started working the railway.
In today's meritocracy, the notion that able men should want nothing more than to spend a working life in railway workshops is hard to credit. But for Les Axby's generation, that's the way it was.
It was the only thing you expected out of life, really, that you were going to go inside, as it was known in Swindon in those days. You either worked inside, or there was very little else that you could work at, to be truthful. You either worked inside, and your dad worked inside, and if your father worked inside, well, then you were virtually expected to follow him.
In the spring of 1985, the rumours were circulating again, but there was a year's work for more than 2,000 people. Besides, it was the year of the 150th anniversary. Swindon had a central role in the celebrations. A great exhibition was planned. Not the time, surely, to announce the end. But the reports that closure was coming persisted in the days we were filming. Preparations for the exhibition went ahead. There was to be a great gathering of steam locomotives, visitors by the hundred from the United States, even from Japan. Ted Jeffries explained what would happen.
This will be emptied. It's on the point of evacuation now, where they're going to clear it out.
All these be cleared away?
Everything for this 150th anniversary. This is where they'll house all the steam engines, the railway armour bits,
Yeah, and then what will happen after that?
Well, when it's all over...
The exhibition?
they say they're going to take it away, but I think it'll be a crying shame to take it away, because it'll be a living museum.
It would be, you think it would be much better used in that way?
If they could keep it as a working museum, it's here forever.
Yeah.
Great Western in Swindon and live on.
4 days later, the announcement came. Dismissal notices would go out in October. The works would be shut by March 1986. With nothing left for Swindon to celebrate, plans for the exhibition were abandoned.
We and Swindon have reached the end of the line. But Mr. Brunel, he wanted his passengers to take a first-class ticket on his engineering onward. And he did it. What an example he set.
It was just after work started on the railway that one of the directors admitted a little nervously that he was worried about the very long distance from London to Bristol. "That's nothing," said Brunel. "I'm not stopping there. I'm going on to New York." And he did, in the biggest ship of a kind the world had ever seen, the Great Western. But that was a conventional paddle steamer built of wood, and Brunel was never much of a man for following convention. So he set to work on an even bigger ship. And here she is, the SS Great Britain, the first iron ship in the world, the first ship in the world to be driven by a screw propeller, the first modern ocean-going liner. And Bristol's really rather a good place to come to assess Brunel's merit. There's a ship here, back in the dock from which she was launched. There's a suspension bridge across the Avon Gorge at Clifton. And of course, there's the Great Western. Well, just how good was it? Think about last time you travelled on a motorway. What did you see? Picture of a bloke trying to open an umbrella and red and white cones. Roadworks. Oh well, say the engineers, the traffic is heavier than we expected and it's going faster. Brunel built his railway 150 years ago. And you don't see cones on that. Happy birthday, Great Western. Well done, Isambard.